is the academic director with a group called Freedom Project Education. And if you don't know anything about them, he'll probably say a few words, but it's a group that is very closely aligned with our values. And speaking of values, one of the things I wanted to mention is, the things we stand for as a group. We're all about, our tagline is get informed, get involved, and make a difference, right? And our speaker tonight does that. He's been informed, he's out helping us get informed, he's involved, and he's out making a difference. All right? So he falls right in line with what we're trying to do as an organization. He received his master's in Renaissance literature from John Carroll University and his PhD in Shakespeare and Renaissance literature from Purdue. He's taught at major research institutions, small liberal arts colleges, and been active in education reform, developing and implementing an elective Bible course that is currently available for public high school students in Texas, not in Illinois. He's professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh and the academic director of Freedom Project Education, as I mentioned earlier. Please give a very warm welcome to Dr. Duke Pesta.
Just want to make sure the technology works. I want to thank y'all for coming tonight. Can you hear me okay? Oh, I have to turn it on. Okay, it says it's on. Nope. Hello, hello. Turn it off. Let's turn it back on. How about that? Better? No? Nope.
Nope, I don't hear it.
Nope. All right. It says it's on.
Is that mic not far enough up?
Alright, unless you can't help it, so we can.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Good. I want to thank y'all very much for coming tonight. This is a very serious problem in our schools. There are a few things I like to do by way of prologue, though. I'd like to point out that this talk is in no way, shape, or form intended to be anti-teacher. The teachers, the public school teachers in our cities, our states, they never ask for this. As a matter of fact, the moms and dads didn't ask for it, the teachers didn't ask for it, your state legislator didn't ask for it, your governors didn't ask for it. Common Core is totally top-down, so I have a lot of sympathy. While there are teachers who purport to like it, there are many, many more who have told us, and I've been in 30 states now talking about Common Core, given about 170 talks, and it's always the same thing. We oppose this from the teachers, but we're not allowed to speak out. We've been told that you have every right to believe what you want, but in our school, you'll either be for it or you'll keep your mouth shut. So there's a lot going on with Common Core. All right, try it again. Can you all hear me? Okay still?
Further up.
How about this? More? Higher? 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 All right, I'm going to assume you can hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, good. So, that's the first thing. This is not meant to be in any way, shape, or form an attack on our teachers. Second thing is that you're going to find over the course of this talk that Common Core is a hugely bipartisan problem. In my state of Wisconsin, where Republicans control the governorship, the assembly, and the Senate, it is Republicans who have stonewalled every attempt to kill Common Core. We had 4 state hearings in Wisconsin on Common Core. And after those hearings, the momentum was absolutely in favor of killing it. Numerous lawmakers, including Democrats, began to craft legislation to get rid of it, and it's an election year. So 2 Republicans refused to let any vote be held on any single piece of legislation. So this is a big bipartisan problem, as you'll see over the course of the talk. And the other thing I would say is we'll leave some time at the end for questions, and I would say to you that I don't understand the workings of Chicago politics, or of Illinois. I don't think anybody does. So I'm able to answer really general questions about Common Core, but I can't answer specific questions necessarily about what your state is or isn't doing. I'll do the best I can, though, to keep that in mind. And then I always like to start with a question for the audience. Here we have Common Core that's been in your schools really for more than 2 years now. How many of you, as you sit here today, would say you are still fuzzy about what Common Core is? Would you just raise your hand? Would you all look around, please? We're talking 90–95% of the people in this room. That's our first thing to worry about, isn't it? How in the world did this happen? Say what you will about Obamacare, and I'll be mentioning that periodically for a variety of reasons. But to start with, it's about the only thing we have in contemporary times to measure against this really big federal takeover of education. So, say what you will about Obamacare. Fact is that it had a hearing in the Congress, had a hearing in the Senate, it had a hearing in the Supreme Court. Common Core has had none of those things. And yet here it is, 2 years in, and you're going to hear, clearly some of you are going to hear for the first time what it really is. That's a problem. It's by design, but it's a problem. So let's start in that obvious place. Let's start with just a quick discussion of what Common Core is. Now my talk's going to have three parts to it. Part one is, what is it and how the heck did we get here? Part two is, let's look at the standards we have currently in math and English. And part three is, whenever you get this kind of federal control, there's always 1,000 tentacles that come with it, right? Common Core is not the end of it all. Whenever the federal government gets involved this way, there are a whole bunch of different arms that reach into different aspects of things. We all know, right, back to Obamacare for a moment. We all know now that the law is passed, right, that there are all sorts of things that are healthcare that never used to be before. Think, for instance, of how they're trying to use healthcare legislation as an opportunity to go after guns. I don't know, any of you have little kids that you've taken to the doctor yet? Take your little 8-year-old to get a physical to play CYO football? And among the things they're asking your kids, mandatorily asking your kids now, your little kids, are there guns in your house? And would you feel better if somebody removed those guns from your house? Under the name of healthcare now, everything is healthcare. And you're going to see real ties before we're done between Obamacare legislation and the kind of data that's going to be collected on your kids in the public schools. So, without further ado, what is Common Core? Common Core is an abbreviated term used to refer to the Common Core State Standards Initiative, a set of national standards for English and math with science guidelines forthcoming. Now let's just stop there for a second. They call them the Common Core State Standards. And that makes it sound, doesn't it? Like all 50 states were consulted, that all 50 states had representatives and participated in the program. Could not be farther than the truth. The standards were drafted, written, validated, imposed on the states before anybody in the states actually had a chance to look at it. So, why do we call it the Common Core State Standards? Same reason we call Obamacare the Affordable Care Act. Because you couldn't possibly be against affordability, could you? Any more than you could be against standards. And when we call them the state standards, we give this false impression by design that this has been a democratic thing. It has not been. The science standards, to give you an example of the linguistic perfidy of the people behind Common Core. The new science standards, Common Core, the words Common Core are trending so badly across the country now that they've changed the name of all the forthcoming curriculum. So it's not Common Core Science, they call it Next Generation Science Standards. And we can laugh about that, but how many people out of 100 do you think are going to buy it? Right? Oh, this isn't Common Core. In fact, if you look at the Next Generation Science Standards online, you'll see the words Common Core plastered all over the document, everywhere except the title which identifies it. So, where do we get them from? This is kind of staggering. And whenever people defend Common Core, be it your school boards or some of your principals, your superintendents, whenever people defend Common Core, they never ever want to talk about this, where it come from. Don't let them get away with it. You'll see in a few minutes why it's critically important who brought it to us. When we boil it down, Common Core was written by about 5 people, the state standards in math and English. I know you've got Joy Pullman in the Heritage Institute down here in Chicago, and I know she's been to speak to some of your groups. Joy has written the definitive article tracing Common Core back to 5 people. All this talk about states and all this talk about all across the country teachers, it's not true. In fact, if you look at Joy's article, Joy Pullman, Pullman, you will find that the chief architect of the Common Core State Standards is a man by the name of David Coleman. He's somebody you should really look into. In fact, I see some of you taking notes out there. I think that's a great idea. One last piece of preface I should say to you is, we make available every single slide we're going to show you tonight. At the end of the night, when the talk is over, we're going to put a website up on the board here. And you can go to that website for free and get all of this information. And if you can't get something, we'll send it directly to you. You won't be data mined if you go to the website. You won't be asked to contribute money or sign up for anything. I believe that this information belongs to you, not me. And as you will see, 95% of what I'm going to tell you today is the work that other people have done, research. So when I'm done talking to you, I want to make it available to you, so it's yours. I will cease to matter, right? And if you can, I want you to verify what I'm telling you. I want you to take a little time and research the things I'm showing you. Because if you do that and hold me accountable, then I'm going to ask you to turn around and hold the people who brought this into your state accountable. Get them to explain to you why they did what they did and most of the claims that they make, because most of them aren't true. So that's what I'm going to lead with here. So, okay, we go back to the Common Core standards, traced back to about 5 individuals, chief among them David Coleman. Coleman has a remarkable history. If you look him up, even his Wikipedia page is pretty staggering. This is a man who is not qualified to write education standards on anything. He has deep, deep ties to both President Obama and to the Department of Education, the federal government in general. Now, we need to start with this one point. Because of a 1965 law, the federal government is prohibited from passing a national curriculum or creating a national set of curriculum standards. The federal government cannot do it. But as we know, this federal government is extremely big on wanting to nationalize things. So what I'm going to suggest to you is the federal government couldn't do it, so they did the next best thing. They commissioned these individuals, a small group of individuals, to write the standards and copyright them. Here, by the way, is the actual copyright for Common Core. This is shocking. The curriculum that is in the process of transforming American schools, and most private schools as well. Over 100 Catholic dioceses signed on to Common Core without being asked to. The curriculum standards that are beginning to transform our schools, they're not owned by the Department of Education, they're not owned by the federal government, they're not owned by the governors, the states, teachers' unions, teachers, moms and dads. This curriculum is copyrighted by 2 Washington lobbyist groups. That should stagger us. These people are unaccountable to your voters. You can't touch them. If you don't like Common Core, you can't get at these people. The copyright as you see it. The NGA Center and the CCSSO shall be acknowledged as the sole owners and developers of the Common Core state standards, and no claims to the contrary shall be made. This is banana republic stuff. How in the world do people who are utterly unaccountable to the system, whose job it is to lobby politicians, how do they get the authority to write these standards? And if you go back, we'll take one step back from the standards. Who paid for it? Well, that would be Bill and Melinda Gates, initially. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation ponied up about $150 million back in 2008, 2009 to these 2 lobbyist groups to write the standards. To date, as of 2 weeks ago, Bill Gates has conceded that to this point, he has spent $2.5 billion to advocate, propagate, and propagandize for Common Core. You can find online, because it's a charitable organization, ostensibly, you can find where every penny of that $2.5 billion went. National parent-teachers organizations, all sorts of educational unions. In other words, if you look behind the people who are advocating for Common Core, you will find Bill Gates' money. I'll give you one example. The National Catholic Education Association, the NCEA, the chief watchdog of our Catholic schools, is 100% on board with Common Core. And they have taken hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants from Bill and Melinda Gates. Now, you think about that with regards to the Catholic schools. The only thing the Bill Gates Foundation has spent more money on than Common Core is abortion and population control in Africa. That's who our Catholic NCEA is in bed with. The National Parent Teachers Association, millions of dollars of grants. The Chambers of Commerce at the state level and at the federal level. When we hear Chamber of Commerce, we think, wow, that's got to be entrepreneurship. That's got to be, right, conservative organizations. Tens of millions of dollars to Chambers of Commerce all across the country to advocate for Common Core. Now let's remember, this is the same Chambers of Commerce who also support open borders and amnesty. Right? What is the argument here? If at some point in the future, our wellspring of illegal and underpaid wage earners, our immigrants, our illegal immigrants to this country, if that dries up, we're still going to need people to do the drone work. And that's one of the things that Common Core does. That's why the chambers of commerce support it. They've got enough CEOs, they've got enough entrepreneurs, they've got enough executives. What they need is underskilled workers who can be put in slots that they'll never leave. That's one of the purposes of Common Core, and that's why the chambers of commerce support it. So Bill and Melinda Gates ponied up $2.5 billion to date to propagandize for these standards. Initially, $150 million to write them. And who exactly is the National Governors Association? When you hear the National Governors Association, it's very tempting to think, well, 50 state governors get in a room and start banging out education standards. With all due respect, and I think I know your answer, would you trust your governor to write education standards? I trust mine reasonably well, Scott Walker. I wouldn't let him anywhere near education standards. I can't think of a governor in the whole country who I would. What qualifies them? But people see the National Governors Association, and that gives lie. Well, see, the governors were involved. This is a state project. That's why they call it Common Core State Standards. No governor had anything to do with this. By their own admission, none of them were consulted and had anything to do with it. The NGA has been defined by one governor who's a part of it as a networking organization to put politicians and their aides in touch with lobbyists. These two organizations are Washington, D.C., K Street lobbyist groups. Their job is to move governors, governors and their aides and politicians towards the agenda that they're getting paid to lobby for. Now ask yourself this question. So you got Bill and Melinda Gates putting up all that money to pay a small group of Washington lobbyists to create a set of curriculum standards that are now in your schools. They'll tell you it's not a federal curriculum. But is Bill Gates, with all his money, is he able to buy his way into your public schools? Well, you say yes, but I don't think he formally has the ability to do that, unless someone in the federal government's helping him. There's no way Gates could have just bought it into the schools. This is a federal government that is absolutely envious of its prerogatives. Do you really think something as big as education, this federal government, would have allowed a small group of activists and a billionaire financier to basically buy, if they weren't in cahoots with them? Let's go back a little bit. Oh, before I do that, the final piece of the puzzle of how we got here. So my suggestion is, Bill Gates could not have without the federal government. In fact, Common Core standards were written by these lobbyists. They were paid for by the Gates. Then, way back in 2008, 2009, before the standards were even fully written, President Obama created the Race to the Top program. How many of you remember that? All right, Race to the Top, what was it? Remember back when President Obama was stimulating everything? Everything except the economy? Remember back in 2008, 2009? Well, he created the Race to the Top program, which he described as a stimulus for education. Given that most state education budgets were doing very badly, in the red, President Obama initially put $5.1 billion of taxpayer money on the table, offered them to every state in the union through the Race to the Top application program. It's been many more billions since. States applied back in 2008, 2009. Illinois got a lot of that money. Give you one example, New York State. Back in 2009, New York State received $700 million from the federal government through the Race to the Top program. And you know what the only provision of Race to the Top was? If you took the money back in 2008 and 2009, you had to accept the Common Core state standards when they were finally written. That's how 46 states in the Union got Common Core sight unseen. But it gets more insidious than this, right? It gets more insidious than this. How many of you remember the big government education paradigm that preceded Common Core? How many of you remember No Child Left Behind? All right. Now, who was the president that gave us that? George W. Bush. A little bit more difficult question. President Bush didn't write No Child Left Behind. Who did he turn it over to? Ted Kennedy. Teddy Kennedy and his people wrote the No Child Left Behind education bill. And it was an absolute disaster. I have never yet met a teacher, a principal, a superintendent, anybody involved with it, a kid who has got anything but contempt for No Child Left Behind. It was a screeching disaster. Why? It was a screeching disaster, number one, because it's outcome-based education. We've been doing outcome-based education in this country pretty much since the Department of Education took over, under Jimmy Carter. When the Department of Education was implemented, it needed to justify its own money. We pour almost as much money in the Department of Ed as we do the Defense Department. And it all goes down the rat hole. But in order to have a bureaucracy like that, they have to justify their existence. And so, hence, outcome-based education was born. And what is outcome-based education? Rather than deal with your kids where they are when you get them and your teachers get them in their classrooms, all different kids have all different abilities. The premise is, let's set a set of standards. And what we're going to be concerned about is getting every single kid to some arbitrary standard. Now let me ask you a question. How many of you have kids or grandkids? Is it possible for you all to get your kids to do exactly the same work roughly in every single subject area? I love the scoffing and the laughter. You know it's impossible, right? And if you can't do it in your own families, how in the world are you going to do it with 60 million American school kids? It's been a failure from the outset. Oh, by the way, Joy Pullman, to quote her once again, she surveyed dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of scientific studies. Do you know there is not the slightest correlation between your state standards and how kids perform in the classroom? In other words, simply having standards, high, lower, in the middle, does not impact how your kids perform in the classroom one bit. The latest of these 40 studies was one done last year by the left-leaning Brookings Institute. And it found absolutely no correlation between state standards and your kids' performance. So why do we keep doing this? Because, as we all know, when a federal government fails, they never go in reverse. They just roll it out again and make it bigger. So you had Goals 2000, and before that you have numerous initiatives all designed to do this. Why else did well, before I go off outcome-based education, is it too drastic of me to simply point out that outcome-based education is nothing more than socialism? Well, think about it. It doesn't matter where you start. It doesn't matter what your attitude is towards education. It doesn't matter what your abilities and skills are. It doesn't matter what other challenges you face in terms of your background, your home, your economics. It doesn't matter whether you're intelligent or not, or how much you try and work. None of that matters. All that matters is when you're done, everybody's going to be in the same place. Is that not socialism? Furthermore, why did they hate Was No Child Left Behind a disaster? Because if you've got a national set of standards like that, what's the only way to measure whether your kids get to the standard or not? Testing. Big, high-stakes national testing, right? So if the only thing and when we say high-stakes testing, we really mean high stakes for the teachers. Because if your teachers don't get your kids to that standard, they lose their jobs. Your principals may lose their positions. Now, I'm all for holding teachers accountable. As a teacher myself, I think it's important. But if you can't get the kids in your family to all perform at the same level across the subjects, how in the world can you expect a teacher who has 30 new kids every term to do it? It's a weak way to try to enforce standards. Go one step further with that. If we can't get our own kids to those standards, how can we ask the teachers to do it? It doesn't make any sense. There's business here about No Child Left Behind and the high-stakes testing. If you're a teacher and your job, your tenure, your advancement, and your future depends on whether or not you get kids in your class to an arbitrary standard, what do you think teachers inevitably have to end up teaching to? Does it make sense, right? And that's not education. If your teachers are so convinced that they have to teach kids to make the test scores, your kids aren't learning how to think. They're not learning how to be educated. They're just learning how to pass tests. And even with that, most of our kids aren't passing them. That's why they hated No Child Left Behind. Outcome-based education, high-stakes testing. How about this? One-size-fits-all education. Because the objective here is not to deal with your kids as individuals, but as a group and a collective, as a little community, to get your kids to the same place. And let me ask you this. When it comes to getting your kids, if you want to get if the only objective is to get all your kids to exactly the same place, inevitably, to do so, would you have to raise standards or lower them? See, you understand how you understand things that our public schools don't seem to understand. It's absolute common sense. That the only way you get more people to the same place is to lower the standards, not elevate them. Isn't that exactly why socialism failed? Didn't it lower the overall standards, the overall prosperity, the overall economic opportunities for people? And when they had been formally lowered, called it equality. In fact, I can't think of a single instance where this kind of stuff has ever raised collective standards. That's why they hated No Child Left Behind. So you're asking me, okay, Pesta, that's great, but why are you talking about No Child Left Behind? Well, because Common Core is nothing but No Child Left Behind on steroids. Common Core is the worst aspects of No Child Left Behind. The tests are higher stakes than ever. They're more comprehensive. The outcome-based education is infinitely more enforced than ever before. The one-size-fits-all becomes the defining paradigm of the program. And what makes it so much worse? Because what was it that killed No Child Left Behind? What killed it after 12 long years? A lost generation of American school kids. What killed it? What killed No Child Left Behind was they made a mistake when they drafted it. No Child Left Behind left enough state and local control so that moms and dads and working teachers and working classrooms recognized that it wasn't working. Speaking of No Child Left Behind, how many of you remember what happened in places like Atlanta, Georgia, and North Carolina, and New York City in 2005 and 6 and 2007, where you had teachers, principals, and even some superintendents of schools who were taking the kids' standardized tests and throwing them in the trash and forging new ones? That's your high-stakes testing. What does it prove? So No Child Left Behind died because at the lowest level there was enough state and local control for teachers and principals and moms and dads to push back. Well, here's how insidious this gets. Not only did Race to the Top offer states billions of dollars to take a set of curriculum standards that nobody had seen, they also offered the states that took it a waiver from of No Child Left Behind. So you're going to tell states, you're going to tell New York back in 2009, federal government admits No Child Left Behind is a disaster. So we're going to give you $700 million, we're going to let you out of No Child Left Behind, and all you have to do is accept the set of curriculum standards that you haven't seen yet. I'm surprised there were 4 states that didn't do it. Right? Alaska, Texas, Nebraska, and Virginia. Shocking that those are the 4 states. Although, before you get too carried away, each of those states has some, the teachers of some of the teachers and some of the school boards have already brought Common Core textbooks into those states, including in Texas. It is illegal to teach Common Core. And just last week, moms and dads are finding all sorts of Common Core textbooks in the curriculum. It is what it is, right? That shows you how deep and insidious this is. Now let me ask you a question. You understand what I'm saying here, right? Without the Race to the Top program, none of this is in your schools. Without the federal government bribing states to sign on the dotted line and receive money in return for taking the standards, this couldn't have happened. They call it, they'll say it's not a federal, simply because of the copyright. They'll say it's not a federal curriculum. But nobody could have put it there but the feds. And given that by law they were prohibited from creating such a thing, the next best thing is to create a small group of people who are close to you, who will draft the standards and copyright them. So you can point to the copyright. I wish the federal government did officially own this, because then you could get at them. This is worse. The people who own it can't be touched, which means the curriculum standards can't be touched. But the only way this gets put into your schools is the federal government. And let me ask you this. Play what if for me. Because I'm convinced that the people who support it now would not be supporting it if. What if instead of Bill and Melinda Gates, it was the evil Koch brothers who put up $2.5 billion? And what if instead of 2 left-leaning lobbyist groups, you had 2 right-leaning ones? And what if instead of a very liberal president, you had a very conservative president who basically took taxpayer money to bribe states to take a set of curriculum standards that nobody had ever seen? Do you honestly believe this would stand? Do you honestly believe the Department of Education and Barack Obama would have allowed it to happen? Koch brothers. I mean, Harry Reid's head would have exploded up. With potentially one redeeming grace, right? That if it had been done, and my point is that I would be every bit as aggravated. And given that you're patriots who want to see limited government, I guarantee you'd be bothered by it too. If this had happened any other way. This is banana republic stuff. It's, even if you think you like Common Core, or think there might be some merit, there's no way you can countenance this. And when you go to your next school board or talk to your next principal, right, and they tell you it's just a set of curriculum standards, they will not talk to you about this. It's done as far as they're concerned. It's ancient history. But it gets worse than this. The Department of Education's 2 chief lawyers back in 2008 and 2009, and do we understand each other when we say, You don't get to be the chief lawyer at the Department of Education if you're a tinfoil hat wearing right-winger. That's not going to happen. The two chief lawyers at the Department of Education in 08 and 09 condemned Common Core, called it a federal takeover of education, and voiced serious concerns about what the government was doing. Not what Common Core was doing, what your federal government was doing. In imposing the Common Core standards and the aligned assessments on the states, stop. That's the second thing that makes it a federal curriculum. The fact that it only got into the schools, the only way it could have gotten into the schools if the feds approved it and put it there. Bill Gates couldn't have done it, neither could David Coleman. They had no authority. Had to be the federal government. Number one. Number two is the tests. All the tests report back to the Department of Education. All the tests are managed by, ultimately, the federal government. And as long as the tests are in place, your teachers are going to have to teach to what's on the tests. You keep hearing all this garbage about how much state and local control we have. We're going to shoot that down in 2 minutes. It makes sense, doesn't it, that he who controls the tests controls what goes on in the classroom. Because the tests are the only way to measure this. So, the two lawyers, in imposing the Common Core state standards and the aligned assessments on the states, the federal government is violating 3 statutes and has put America on the road to a national curriculum. With respect to the race to the top Common Core scheme, you have to mention them together, as do the two department lawyers. Robert S. Eitel and Kent D. Talbert, former Deputy General Counsel and General Counsel, respectively, of the U.S. Department of Education, concluded that, quote, these standards and the tests, the assessments, will ultimately direct the course of elementary and secondary study in most states, the 46 that took them, across the Union, running the risk that states become little more than administrative agents for a national K-12 program of instruction and raising a fundamental question about whether the Department of Education is exceeding its statutory boundaries. And we've heard the term, little more than administrative agents. Back to Obamacare just for a second. All the states in the Union now, because of the national health care law, are supposed to set up these state exchanges, right? What do they exchange? Can the state of Illinois or Mississippi or Florida, can they actually give you something that's not the national health care law? No. All the states do under Obamacare is they become secretaries, paper pushers and rubber stampers for what the federal program is. That's what has to happen to education if Common Core gets fully implemented. You think about this. Right now in your schools, there's a book you don't want your kid to read, or a sexuality lesson you don't want your kid to be around. You can walk into your teacher's classroom and you can opt your kid out. 99 times out of 100, that's all it takes. If this thing ever becomes fully federalized, which is the ambition, and you want to try to get your kid, and everything is tested as part of a national standard, and you want to opt your kid out, you go to your teacher, she can't help you. Go to your superintendent, they can't help you. Someone's going to give you the number for 1-800-ARNIE Duncan at the Department of Education. How much Muzak do you think you're going to listen to before Arnie picks up? This is a serious thing now, that your state and local control, they're your kids, they don't belong to the state. They certainly don't belong to the federal government. How are you going to, what happens to state and local school boards if Common Core is fully implemented? I live in Wisconsin. We pay, believe it or not, we pay higher real estate property taxes than you do in Illinois. Right? We're up there with New Jersey and New York and Connecticut and California. You're below us. But I suppose one of the theoretical benefits of paying all this tax is that most of that money is supposed to go to education. Do you honestly think in a place like Wisconsin, if this gets fully federalized, Wisconsin will be able to keep that money in its safe? It's going to have to go to Washington, isn't it? There are so many consequences of this that nobody wants to talk to you about. How about this? They go on, the two chiefs. By the way, these two lawyers resigned over this. And they have now released a book just 2 weeks ago that's all about the coming federal takeover of education. I haven't read it yet, it's just been released. The Race to the Top application, the initial vehicle through which Common Core was imposed on the states, it's the race, this is the third thing that demonstrates, I think beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this is a federal curriculum. Because it's not Common Core that requires these things. It's the Race to the Top program. That's how it got put in the schools, and that's a federal program. In the Race to the Top application, the initial vehicle through which Common Core was imposed on the states, Race to the Top requires all the states who took it to, quote, adopt a set of content standards that are substantially identical across all the states in the consortium. That means that states must adopt Common Core word for word. Now, interestingly, well, here's a good idea. Interestingly, the Race to the Top application says that states are allowed to supplement the Common Core standards, but only by 15%. Here's the quote. But only if the additional standards, quote, do not exceed 15% of the state's total standards in any area. Well, now wait a second. That seems awfully big of them, doesn't it? That you could take 85% of Common Core, but you can still supplement it and add on to it by 15%. Well, wait a second. How are they going to measure that extra 15%? If Illinois can do things 15% different than Wisconsin, who can do things 15% different than Ohio, they'd have to make 50-state tests, wouldn't they? To measure each of the different 15%. And that would not make it a federal program. They're not going to do that. They're going to have the two testing consortiums and the one test. So what's going to happen to that 15% after the state of Illinois has its first Common Core national test? What are your teachers going to figure out? You can teach 15% more, but your kids are never going to be tested on it. So in fact, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are 3 states in the Union where Common Core was rolled out much earlier than in Illinois. New York, Florida, and Kentucky. 1 blue state, 1 red state, and 1 purple state. 2 years of what will become the 2 years of testing in those states. It has been such a disaster in those 3 states that all 3 of them are trying vehemently to pull out. About a month ago, the New York State Teachers Union, hardly a hotbed of conservative activism, they voted unanimously to pull the state of New York out of Common Core, and they demanded the immediate firing of the New York superintendent of schools who brought it to the state. Right now, Democrat lawmakers are climbing over each other's back to craft kill Common Core legislation. You know, right, that Chicago Teachers Union just a couple days ago voted overwhelmingly to get rid of Common Core. Karen Lewis, right, who I think is to the left of Bill Ayers politically. Seriously, look her up, my God. She pulled out and wrote the most scathing indictment of Common Core. It made me nervous, right? And I'll show you a clip from it in a moment. You've got the NEA, the largest teachers union group in the country, who about 2 months ago called the implementation of Common Core so utterly botched that the whole thing had to be scrapped and started over. You know who else opposes Common Core? The Occupy Wall Street movement. Why? Wow. Because of the crony capitalism involved. It's been estimated that about 70% of America's school districts are going to have some kind of computer or technology upgrades to be able to handle the Common Core testing. Whose computers do you think are going to be in those classes? The second biggest private contributor to Common Core is Pearson Publishing. Pearson owns 100% of the Canadian textbook market and 80% of the American textbook market. Over the last 6 months, Pearson has bought up 40 different American small presses, paying 5 and 7 times what they're worth because they want the monopoly. I guarantee you, if you go home and look at your kids' textbooks, they're Pearson or a Pearson company, Pearson bought. Pearson just relieved a lucrative multi-billion-dollar contract to make money off of helping to administer every single test your kid is going to take. That's why Occupy Wall Street opposes it. There is no provision allowing a state to subtract anything whatsoever from Common Core. Here's Karen Lewis's statement, right, from May 7th, 2014. I agree with educators and parents across the country. The Common Core mandate represents an overreach of federal power into personal privacy and also as well as into state educational autonomy. Common Core eliminates creativity in the classroom and impedes collaboration. We also know that high-stakes standardized testing is designed to rank and sort our children, and it contributes significantly to racial discrimination and the achievement gap among America's school kids. Now, I don't believe for 1 second that Karen Lewis opposes Common Core for the same reasons you and I do. But the fact that the left is this increasingly adamant, I bring all this up Because the next time they tell you that this is merely some right-wing kooks and fanatics trying to throw this in their faces. This is a disaster of epic proportions across the country. All right, that's the longest segment of my talk. Do you understand why you had to hear it? How do you countenance this? If you think Common Core is a good idea, or if you've bought the sort of cliche Republican line that standards are a good thing, the idea, right, that if you don't accept Common Core, you don't want standards at all, that ranks right up there. With if you don't support the Affordable Care Act, you want people to die in the streets. And if you don't support the latest radical feminist agenda, it's a war on women. It's absolute nonsense. But let's now take a look at the actual standards then. Right now we have English and math. And there's plenty of evidence to show that those are a screaming nightmare as well. You need one last little history lesson. Common Core did one other thing that you're tempted to think was a good idea. Back in 2009, 2010, when the standards were finally drafted out, they convened a committee to validate the standards. They brought in people from the outside whose job it was to look at the standards, measure them, and if they were deficient, fix them. This committee that was called the Validation Committee, they were even chartered with the ability to scrap the standards and start over if they wanted to. They brought in 29 people. A lot of low-level educators, with all due respect too, you understand, right? That to write a national set of standards for math requires a tremendous amount of math. Simply being a 6th grade math teacher or a high school geometry teacher does not qualify you to write national standards. So they brought in some elementary teachers, a couple of high school teachers, but they only brought in 2 experts. The committee brought in 1 math expert and 1 English expert. That was it, to validate the whole set of standards. The English professor, retired English professor, was a woman by the name of Sandy Stotsky, Dr. Stotsky. She is the foremost expert on English language arts and childhood development, English development in the country. They brought her in. They also brought in a math professor, a retired math professor from Stanford, a man by the name of James Milgram, M-I-L-G-R-A-M. Milgram's a serious dude. He's the guy who did most of the math computations for the Apollo moonshot in the late 60s. He's a big deal. Well, both of these people voted no, absolutely not. Stotsky said, and I quote, "These standards in English will set our kids 2 years behind the 2 years they're already behind the high-achieving countries of the world." And Jim Milgram said, quote, "It is an absolute joke to think that Common Core math will prepare our kids for STEM math, STEM careers, science, technology, engineering, and math, or even college-level math." Right? That's what Milgram said. Not only did they both vote no, but they convinced other people to vote no. Do you know that their objections and their report was completely written out of Common Core? There is no mention of it. The remaining members went ahead and validated the standards without them, and it completely neglected the recommendations. The only 2 experts brought onto Common Core voted no. Stotsky and Milgram are traveling the country, doing what I do. Coming and giving talks, not charging speaker fees, right? Just having their expenses paid and telling people what happened. They know more about Common Core than anybody in your whole state. They were in the room. We'll talk more about them. The English standards. This is Dr. Stotsky's chart, ultimately. The information is from her. Why? Why are the English standards deficient? Because, for the first starter, Common Core English requires that up to 50% of the classic literature your kids used to study in English class is removed in favor of informational texts. Almost all of it coming from the federal government. Almost none of it having any ideological balance whatsoever. Your kids, instead of reading the great books of the Western and American tradition in English class, they're going to be reading Environmental Protection Agency pamphlets. They're going to be reading President Obama's own executive orders. In fact, Sandy estimates that about half of all the information texts blame global warming on the talk about man-made global warming and blame it all on America and free market capitalism. That's what your kids are going to be reading. Why do we read? As an English professor, I feel very comfortable talking about this. Why do we teach our kids to read from stories? When you want to put your kids to bed, you read them a bedtime story. If the whole purpose is to get your kids to go to sleep, why don't you read them a Bill Gates computer manual? It would make sense, but you don't. You read them literary stories. Little stories that get their little hearts thumping and their little eyelids flapping, because Kids learn how to read, to engage. They develop a moral compass from reading great literature stories. That's why. Well, Common Core, not only does it remove up to 50% of that literature, and you think about what removing that literature does. You, on top of replacing it with tendentious political garbage, you are also divorcing your kids from the 2,000-year Judeo-Christian history of their culture. You are divorcing them from the 300-year struggle in America for liberty, freedom, prosperity. You're divorcing them from any cohesive sense of the things of the past. That's Sandy's objection. By the way, Sandy's a Yankee Democrat. She is no right-winger. Trust me when I tell you I'm sympathetic to right-wingers. I just want to convince you moving forward, right, that the people who are criticizing this, they come from all walks of life. This is a burgeoning effort from people on every side of the aisle. On top of that, too, we know categorically that kids only learn how to write well after they first learn how to read well. When you go to study a foreign language, you don't start writing it. You got to read. You got to get some syntax and some vocabulary and some grammar. Well, at every grade level, Common Core lowers the level of reading required by 50% and elevates the level of writing by 50%. Your kids at all grades write more than they read. And if your kids are writing more than they're reading, what do you think they're writing about, Sandy points out? Simply the propaganda that they're getting in some of these books. That's a problem. So what do you get? Less discussion of characters, morality, ethics. What much more indoctrination? More informational text, less literature. Here are just a couple of those recommended exemplar texts, right? So freshmen in high school are going to have to read Recommended Levels of Insulation, a report released in 2010 by the EPA and the Department of Energy. Your kid going to want to become a better reader by reading that stuff? How about for 10th and 11th graders? President Obama's own Executive Order 13423, strengthening federal environmental, energy, and transportation management. How about this? A long essay on the history of the evolution of the grocery bag. Spoiler alert, paper and plastic are both bad, and America's destroying the planet. Here's the third leg, though. Here's the third leg. You've got the committee who wrote the standards. Oh, and you won't believe this. No sooner did David Coleman write the standards, and oversee the writing of the standards, than he immediately rotated off the Common Core committee and went to become the president of the college boards, where as we speak, he's rewriting the SATs to conform to this garbage. How's that for incestuous? Remember, this guy is accountable to no one. And now he's transforming the SATs. Here's the third leg in the stool, though. You've got the Common Core Committee, unaccounted, unaccountable. You've got them who put the standards together. Then you've got the federal government who put them in your schools. And you're going to hear, and it's right, that Common Core is not a curriculum, it's a set of standards. Well, what happened? After the Common Core standards were written, what do you think the textbooks published? They immediately rushed in and provided the pedagogy and the curriculum to meet the standards. As I mentioned to you, the single biggest textbook company who publishes Common Core, over like 80% of Common Core textbooks are Pearson. They're the second biggest donor to Common Core. They rushed in and provided the curriculum. What Common Core did that was really interesting, they didn't require any books be read, but they put out a list of 450 texts that were stamped Common Core approved. These are the exemplar texts. Just out of curiosity, which 450 texts do you think appear in some arrangement in every single Common Core textbook? The ones that Common Core recommended. Common Core said, we aren't going to require you to read anything, but here's a list of 450 books or texts that we stamp as Common Core approved. Along come the textbook companies, and they put some variant of those texts and those texts alone in their textbooks. You can't the curriculum comes from the textbook companies, which is guided by Common Core, and all of it's overwritten by the federal government. And you can see this stuff here, right? There's no answer for this, by the way. There's not a single informational text in Common Core that challenges, questions, or even dares to whisper the possibility that these texts are wrong about things. That's not critical thinking. You're not exposing kids to sides. You're now beginning to give them propaganda from one side. And as Sandy points out, this is absolutely staggering. Why is so much of the literature that's left in Common Core developmentally, graphically, and sexually inappropriate for kids? This is The Bluest Eye. This is Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. This is one of what Sandy estimates to be about over 30 books. I've looked at all of them. Over 30 books in the high school curriculum alone that are sexually inappropriate for your kids. Toni Morrison's a great writer, Nobel Prize winner, African-American novelist. But we would not assign this book to freshmen in college. It's about a 12-year-old girl who's the victim of incest and rape. And she ultimately comes to bond with her rapist and describes in graphic detail the nature of the relationship sexually. Right? I'm going to show, I blocked out the bad words. It's small print. I don't know how well you'll see it anyway. But just so you can see some of the stuff here. This book has been in schools for kids as young as 8th grade already as part of Common Core. There are dozens of books like this, including a book called Dreaming in Cuban, which has exceedingly graphic sex in it. How many of you heard of the New Hampshire dad who was arrested a couple days ago? His middle school daughter was reading, by everybody's account, I've seen it, it's softcore pornography. This is hardcore pornography. What his middle school daughter was reading was softcore porn. He went and protested at a school board meeting and they let him out in handcuffs. Why? Sandy asked the question, why? We need to, that's Sandy, we need to explore why. Why so many of these exemplar texts are out of place, not just in the subject area Common Core put them, but in a high school curriculum altogether. I'm going to let that question hang. Most of the literature's gone now, and what little remains, much of it is either violently, graphically, or developmentally sexually inappropriate. Have one mom of a 4th grader in Wisconsin whose little daughter read 100 pages for a month in English class of dystopian literature, all about the world coming to an end due to man-made global warming that America caused. But that's not even the worst part about it. The whole thing was about rape and cannibalism and what happened to society after the planet was destroyed. This stuff was shamefully graphic. All the documents, we have it. This is all across the country now. I'm going to let that question hang. Why is there so much developmentally inappropriate stuff? We'll come back and answer it. But let's talk briefly about the math standards. Milgram, you keep hearing from the people who support Common Core that Common Core math has been internationally benchmarked, that we measured this against all the high-achieving math countries in the world. Ask them to show you the data. Milgram, being a mathematician, when he got to the committee, he said, they handed him a sheet with like 20 countries on and bragged, here are the countries we've measured this against. And Milgram said, good, show me your data. And the entire time Milgram was on the committee, they never produced it, never once. In fact, Stotsky is convinced, and Milgram both, that they simply printed out a list of countries because there's not, and nobody anywhere, not your Chicago DPI, nobody anywhere can show you that data. What does that tell you? It's one of the reasons Milgram would absolutely not vote for it. But when Milgram was asked, you know, what do you think is the philosophy behind Common Core English and math? He suggested this video. You can't make this up. This woman is a community organizer talking to Chicago, Illinois high school teachers about the philosophy of Common Core math. Here's the short clip.
But even under the new Common Core, even if they said 3 times 4 was 11, if they were able to explain their reasoning and explain how they came up with their answer really in words and oral explanations, and they showed it in the picture but they just got the final number wrong, we're really more focusing on the how and the what we...
It's a short clip, I can play it again, but we need to turn the volume up.
Just put your microphone in.
No.
No?
We'll go back and I'll play it again, but I'll wait. It's a short clip. Are you ready? Okay.
But even under the new Common Core, even if they said 3 times 4 was 11, if they were able to explain their reasoning and explain how they came up with their answer really in words and oral explanations, and they showed it in the picture but they just got the final number wrong, we're really more focusing on the how and the what we...
Okay, you heard that, right? And this gentleman just tells me that that's the curriculum director for what school?
Grays Lake District 46, right here next door.
And you shot that video?
Yep.
Hallelujah, right? Milgram, that's amazing. What a small world. And Milgram said that's it. There is no sense whatsoever that this curriculum will allow kids who are good at math to go ahead and be good at it. This curriculum is designed for kids who are not good at math to feel good about themselves. He said that, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the last 2 years, we've lost more gifted and talented education programs in this country than in the last 40 years combined. Why? Because when you have one-size-fits-all standard-based education, you cannot have kids excel the standard any more than you can have them fall behind. In fact, kids who excel the standard are more worrisome for things like Common Core. Because if you have to lower the standards for kids who fall behind, that's easy. But to raise the standards for kids who excel, you can't do it. And so that's why we're losing all these programs. Give you a quick example. And I asked Milgram about me, and he agreed with me. I said, look, when I was in 3rd grade, I had like a college-age reading level. I have no idea why. I was your typical slapper kid. It's just the way I was born. Right? It's probably why I entered the high finance world of English professor. Right? But in 3rd grade, my math ability was decidedly 2nd grade. To tell you the truth, it sort of still is. I mean, I can balance a checkbook, I can leave a tip, but that's it. But so what? The world needs more, no offense, the world needs more than just CPAs, right? And so, under the old way of doing things when I was in school, they let me. I got to read books like Shakespeare and Dante in 3rd grade. Can you imagine what my life would have been like? It with the one talent, and ask my wife, the only talent that I have, right? If I was stuck reading Beezus and Ramona for the rest of my life, or 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. But that's exactly what Common Core requires. Milgram points to the second video I'm going to show you. It's a short clip. He knows the mother in charge of this kid. It's a mom and a 3rd grade daughter. And mom, who has an advanced math degree, cannot help her 3rd grade daughter with math. So she puts the little girl in front of the blackboard and says, okay, work a problem. So I'll show you this one. The little girl is a bit of a slow talker, so I may have to help her. Here's your hard math problem. Add 3 numbers. 1568, 1423, and 680. That's it. Add those numbers.
So what I want you to do is, can you solve that problem showing me the way that you learned how to solve it in school?
Okay.
And talk to me while you're solving it.
So we learned that a big square like this is 100. So we could make that 100 into a cube, which would make 1,000. So I'm going to do that.
So if a square is 100, then a cube equals 1,000.
So let's just say that's 1,000. And now we still have to do 500. Could make that into 5 sheets.
Do you notice how nobody's adding anything yet? This is what you have to do just to get the numbers on the board.
And we have 60, which are just lines of 10.
The lines are 10 and the dots are 1s.
For her birthday, she got 1,000. The dots represent 20.
Okay.
So now we have to add all of these together. So you could make 1,000. All of these together is 400. Now you need 600 more. So now I'm going to write the numbers down. So we have 1,000 plus, let's just say 3,000, because we have 3 cubes. 3,000 plus 100. So now we can erase all these sheets and hundreds and tens instead. So we can just add, and that gives us a total of 3,763.
Okay. Father, that problem you just solved took about 8 minutes.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's what we're doing in school. But at home, I'm taught how to stack, and we're not allowed to do stacking in school.
You are not allowed to do stacking math in Common
So
Core.
I'm going to stack these numbers, which is very easy.
There it is.
You got two different answers.
What are you thinking? You're looking at your problems.
I got two different answers.
You got two different answers. What do you think happened?
Maybe I counted wrong.
Looks like you did the stacking correctly, and that took you about a minute.
So I put something messed up and I was,
What do you think happened?
well, since that way was more confusing and it was like,
Out of the mouths of babes, right? And the other thing that's so frustrating about Common Core math is if everybody did it that way, we might be able to help our kids with their homework. But there's no two ways, there's no one way of doing it. Sometimes you're drawing squiggly lines and dots and dashes. In one Wisconsin school, we're the dairy state after all. Elementary school kids are taught to add by drawing and subtract by drawing cows. You have to draw enough cows so that if there's any problem, you can count the legs of the cow and get the right answer. We talked about stepping back to English for a second, right? Talking about the tendentious political nature of the English. Kids are writing more than reading. So what in the world are they writing about? Maybe that explains the third grade assignment third graders in Wisconsin who were sent home to write an essay about how the state was just like the family, but better. That was the essay topic. And if you ask me, I'm giving the game away now. If you ask me in one word, you put a gun to my head and make me describe in one word what Common Core's main purpose is, I would say it's not education, it's statism. Every aspect of this, and that's what Milgram says too, and Sandy, every aspect of this curriculum is radically politicized. You've seen some of the goofy math assignment questions, right? I saw one in Wisconsin. Now, I almost hesitate to talk about that because I'm waiting for the link, but I saw it. We gave a talk 3 days ago in Wisconsin, and a dad came up to me afterward. He had a textbook in his hand. He said, I just found out about your talk today, and I had to come. He opened the textbook. He showed me a math problem. The math problem was these kids, there were 2 buses. And on one bus, you had a number of kids. It was obvious that some of the kids were black and some were white on both buses. The question the students had to figure out was, what percentage of racists were on each bus? And the white kids were the racists. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. He's mailing me the online link for it. I'm going to add it. But as Milgram points out, you understand that for a bad math student like me, I don't love that. You put 8 minutes to do a problem, you put me at a blackboard and I get to draw cubes and circles and lines. One of the preferred ways of teaching Common Core math at the elementary level is the so-called parent share program, where you put kids in little groups of 2 and 3. The teachers don't teach math. You hand the kids an assignment, a math problem, and the goal of the assignment is not to get the right answer. It's to get all the kids in the group to agree on what they think the right answer was. We got moms from New York who are emailing us tests all the time. One little boy, third grader, 6 times 7, he wrote 42 in. He got it marked wrong. And in red pencil, the teacher says, the other 2 kids in your peer group agreed on a different number. They got it right because they agreed. You got it wrong because you failed to meet agreement with the other. We got another kid, a little boy, who in an addition problem the answer was 111. He got it marked wrong because he wrote 111 in rather than drawing the required 111 circles it took to answer the question. Milgram points out, 8 minutes for a problem. You put me, when I was 2 years old in 2nd, 3rd grade, given my math abilities, you put me in a group with 2 other kids, they could have said 6 times 7 equals 4 million, and I'd have said whatever you said. Right? You see the problems with this, and you see how this curriculum is designed for low-achieving math people like me. It's not in the same way that if I had been held back because some people have called this rightly a social justice curriculum. The ABCs, 1, 2, 3s of education are now subordinate to the sociology, and that's the big change in Common Core. For years and years and years, hey, I've been a professor for 20 years, I can tell you, for years and years and years, we have been teaching our kids to add, write, add, and subtract, but while we've been doing it, we've been slowly moving them left, slowly moving them to big government. Well, the big difference between Common Core and what came before it is now the sociology comes before the ABCs. This is a garbage curriculum. But only secondarily are they interested in educating your kids. Now the sociology becomes the main purpose. And if you don't believe me, look at this. There are 24 school districts now across the country, at least that I've seen, that have done this. In California, you had moms and dads beginning to freak out because by the time their kids were in 4th grade, they could not add and subtract independently. So mom started hiring tutors and making the kids do more math. The school district freaked out. This is an actual, as far as I know, it's still, this is the entire Irvine Unified School District of Orange County, California. When they found out kids were trying to get ahead of math, they freaked out and they threatened, and they warned, and then they threatened students publicly. Here's the warning. The links on this page are intended to support the classroom instruction that your child receives from his teacher. It is not appropriate to go ahead of classroom instruction or to use this site to have your child work on math that is intended for subsequent grades. That's the warning. Now here's the threat. Your child's math instruction and placement will not change as a result of working ahead in these materials. This means that your child will continue to work in the grade level appropriate math materials regardless of any work that is done and turned into the teacher. Your kid stays put. Your kid might be able to do calculus in 5th grade, but he's going to stay there drawing those ridiculous cubes and squares because it's just not socially just for your kid to have those math skills. This may be the most shocking thing I've showed you. So far, it's going to get worse. Your kids are being told by schools now that they stay put. They will go nowhere. It's futile to try to get ahead. Don't you dare try to move beyond this. Schools are telling this to your kids. This is what Milgram's talking about. Milgram also points out that in every high-achieving math country on earth, they start algebra, serious algebra in 7th grade or even 6th grade. In No Child Left Behind America, American kids routinely started algebra in 8th grade. And under Common Core, algebra is pushed into high school, which means your kids will not get advanced math in math class anymore. They will not have access to things like calculus. As Milgram points out, how in the world are your kids going to be ready for college level math? They can't be. Milgram says, where are your architects and your engineers and your doctors going to come from? Right? It's just not going to happen. It doesn't make any sense. This is where Common Core math leaves us. Right? All right. This is the third part of our little talk. And in some ways, it's the most shocking. But I would also like to say that this is the part of the talk that talks about things that are related to Common Core, oftentimes deeply involved in Common Core, but cannot be blamed only on Common Core. Much of what I'm about to show you, Common Core becomes the government-approved conduit with which to get at your kids for this stuff. You've all heard about the data mining, right? This is the big facility the feds just finished in Utah last year, where they want to house the data they begin to collect on your kids, starting when they're 5 years old. So annoyed are the people of Utah about this that they're trying to pass legislation to cut water off to them. They want them out. If this isn't a federal curriculum, why has the Department of Education been writing curriculum to support this for 3 years now? This document, you can see when it was released, February 2013. It's a document from the Department of Education. It's titled, Promoting Grit, Tenacity, and Perseverance. These are the critical factors for success in education in the 21st century. Let me ask you a question. When you think of your kid's education, do you think of the words grit? Grit it out, just grit it out, man. Tenacious, be a tick and hang in there. Just persevere. I understand why you would use these words for what you just saw. But is that your vision of your kid's education? When I hear the word grit, I think of John Wayne getting a bullet dug out of his thigh. Right? But this is their attitude towards this is not about growth and your kids becoming what they can be. This is not about opening a world of possibilities and limitless America. This is about drone work, right? And if you open this document to the 43rd page, you see these. These are the ways they intend to data mine your kids. It's not just that they're going to ask your kids questions. They want to biologically meter your kids. This is their own document. The one on the right is basically a blood pressure cuff, ordinarily worn around the bicep. They've adapted it to fit little kids' wrists. It'll measure blood pressure, heart rate, pulse. We have a mom again in New York. Notice how so many of my examples come from Florida, New York, and Kentucky? Because they've got a 2-year head start on you. You haven't had your first test yet. A little girl in Florida came home with an angry bruise around her wrist. The only way Mom would have ever known. How did you get that? Well, Mom, the student nurse put this on my wrist, and one of the principals came in and they asked me dozens and dozens and dozens of questions, including questions like, do your parents vote? Did they vote in the last election? Who did they vote for in the last election? Are there guns in your house? Would you feel safer if somebody from the school took your guns away? Are your parents divorced? This little girl's word. Would you feel better if if the school helped you live with the parent of your choice? Dozens and dozens of these questions. The facial, you got the posture analysis. See, do certain topics cause your kids to slip down in the chair? The mouse, that pressurized mouse. Do certain subjects cause your kid to sweat more or grip the mouse more firmly? And one of my favorites is the facial expression camera. This has already appeared in numerous... By the way, as far as I know, none of these are in Illinois schools, as far as I know. They're not in Wisconsin schools. Are they what?
We're broke.
Yeah, but that's not going to stop this. All right? They'll find money for it. Is it in California schools? Yep. New York? Yep. Florida? Yep. Wisconsin. The reason you don't see it in your school districts yet? Because in Wisconsin, just a month ago, the state legislature in Wisconsin set aside $7.1 million to now begin, because the tests are coming now, to now begin the process of data mining Wisconsin school kids. And more Republicans voted for it than Democrats. Well, in fairness, there were 15 on the committee. 8 Republicans, 7 Democrats all voted for it. Right? This one, the facial expression camera. In one school district, high school district in Pennsylvania, the only school supply that was allowed last year was a laptop computer. And you couldn't buy your own. When these kids showed up to class the first day, they were all given state computers. And moms and dads in the public schools were billed $650 for those computers to use them. They contain NASA-grade quality global positioning tracking. Oh, wherever that thing went, they knew it. Every single keystroke ever struck on that computer in your child's presence becomes part of her permanent data files. Now that's like the NSA. I'm not saying that there's somebody sitting there watching your kid type in real time, but it's like the NSA, right? Like we're collecting all these phone calls. So if we're not watching it, but if I ever accuse you of being a terrorist, they can go into your file and begin to piece together whatever phone calls they've had. And whenever that computer was turned on, open the computer and turn it on, there was a camera right in the center that was always filming you and recording it. So no matter what, when that was turned on, whoever your 8-year-old daughter walks in front of that computer screen in her negligee or getting out of the shower, all part of whatever the computer catches, it catches. This all gets dumped into your kid's permanent data file. And they've already said, the federal government, that they plan to make your kids' data files available to employers. So under Obamacare, what? Your kids are kids until they're 27, right? Well, when your kid turns 28 and goes to get his first job, see, always skip a beat when the smart audiences always laugh at that. But it's true. All that, you remember when you and I were kids? The only thing that ever appeared on our transcripts was our final grade. Under this, every assignment, every teacher comment, every conduct remark, every malady your kid has, if your kid's dyslexic, that becomes part. Think about what that might mean for a job someday. If your kid's dyslexic, if your kid has ADHD, all that becomes part of your kid's permanent file that employers will pick through when they determine who they're going to hire. Right? This is the objective. And then there's this. I want you to help me out with this. You tell me what all of these words mean. These are the... See, yeah, they're already watching it. Dave's going to fix that, I hope. Right? So you saw the brief title. I'll continue. These are the National Sexuality Education Standards. The fact that they're the national standards means what? Who owns them? Federal government. The fact that they're standards means that your kids are going to have to be what? Tested on them. Did you see the subtitle? The subtitle was Core Content and Skills for grades 5, kindergarten through 12. So how many of you teach your 5-year-olds about sex? How many of you teach your 5-year-olds about homosexuality? Well, they're about to. This curriculum was published in September of 2012. These are your national sexuality education standards. And look at this. They call them core content. Tell me what that means. The people will actually look you in the eye when they see this and say it's not Common Core. Well, okay, maybe not. But then let's turn to page 6 of the document. This is when the sexuality standards were written. These are all the books, the things they went to figure out how to write the standards. And notice the last one. The national sexuality standards were informed by the work of, Common Core state standards for English and math. Why in the world do the national sex standards, when they wrote them, did they have to consult with and utilize Common Core English and math? Because these sex standards were never meant to be rolled out as a separate curriculum. Unlike English and math, which were rolled out, you saw them, you took them. The sex standards will never be rolled out because they are designed to be taught in every other area of the curriculum. Does that make sense now? Go back to Sandy Stotsky's question. Why is there so much graphic sex in the books that your kids read? Because they have to be. Because they don't take 5-year-olds to health class. They're not going to put your 6-year-old daughter in a sex ed class. English, math, even the new art curriculum is out and they have to incorporate these standards in it. Gym class is going to have to incorporate these standards. You understand, if they're going to get your kids all this information, they're going to have to make it a part of everything. Look at some of the Randy math. How many of you saw the math question that was made national news a couple weeks ago? It was not math, English question. Again, for 5th graders, 5th grade kids were given a Common Core paragraph. And they had to figure out what the situation in the paragraph was from context. Here's the story. Mom comes home. She goes to make the bed. She finds a hair beret in the bed that's not her hair beret. Through a series of sentences, the conclusion is Dad's having an adulterous affair. Why are they doing this stuff? You understand, right? Well, think about the Common Core math I just showed you. What is the purpose of all that ridiculously I'm not being glib here. I understand that not all kids learn alike, but if the purpose of Common Core math was to genuinely help our kids, why not let them learn the stacking method and then try to get them to see it visually if that's what you think needs to happen? But no, they ban the old ways of doing math. As Milgram points out, the only purpose for that math curriculum is to guarantee that you moms and dads cannot help your kids with math. Only the state, only the teachers, only the schools can do it. Everything about this curriculum, and the sex stuff, it's all designed to separate your values and your views from your kids, to make them the state's, not yours. So, how do they do the sex standards? They break the standards up into 3-year triads. 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, test. 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, test. 11, 12, and 13-year-olds, test. So at age 5 they start. Let me show you some of the standards directly from the document, all quoted. You can find this document online yourself. By the end of 2nd grade, by the time they're 7, your kids should be able to identify different kinds of family structures and demonstrate ways to show respect for different kinds of families. Now, I'm agnostic on the issue. But I'm telling you what if you come from a Christian family, or an Orthodox Jewish family, or a Muslim family? Who's going to get to decide what respect is? Can you respect different kinds of family structures if you don't support homosexual marriage? And another thing, I don't believe the federal government has any business teaching your kids sex. But you want to disagree and say, no, Dr. Pesta, we at least need to teach birds and bees, sperm and egg. Or at least we need to teach condoms. You notice how you're going to see every one of these standards has nothing to do with biological sex or with birth control. This is pure sociology. And how in the world does a 5, a 6-year-old grasp this? You're going to expose 5 and 6-year-olds to every different kind of family structure, to lesbian parents, right, to gay parents. You're going to expose them to all that, and you're going to make them demonstrate respect for all of those things. When you're doing this to kids at 5 and 6 and 7, you are not teaching them anything. You are imposing things on their brains. You are brainwashing them. How about this? By the time they're 7, describe differences and similarities in how boys and girls may be expected to act. See, if there's no such thing as math, if math isn't true, then biology and gender are all made up as well. There is no such thing as boys and girls. And you're going to get kids at age 5 and 6 and convince them that boys and girls are boys and girls not because of biology or genetics or sex, but simply because culture made them that way. And you see how ridiculous this is for a 7-year-old? You're going to ask them, to provide examples of how friends, family, media, society, and culture influence ways boys and girls think. Picture that. You're going to send your kid to the internet doing a sex and gender search. And what business does the government have teaching this? And you think about it, Common Core is the vehicle. It's the vehicle for this. It was made Common Core to implement this stuff. Is this technically Common Core? You can't say it's not. You can say yes it is, or you can say maybe. But the one thing you can't say is that it's not. Because the only way this is getting into your schools now is through Common Core. It's the only conduit for it. How about this? By the time your kid is 10, by the time your kid is 10, 5th grade, your kid will, because this is the standard, your kid's going to define sexual orientation as the romantic attraction of an individual to someone of the same gender or someone of a different gender. You don't have a choice. And if you're teaching your kids your own morality, your own faith, your own worldview, it's going to come into conflict with theirs, isn't it? Who's going to win that battle? And are you telling me, seriously, that when we get that far, this isn't going to be cause to take your kids from you at some point? Or to challenge your parenthood if you're giving them information in the name of... And what does any of this have to do with biology? This is pure sociology for your kids. It's pretty shocking. Even more shocking than this is how they plan to administer the standards, taken right from the document. Well, instruction by qualified sexuality education teachers is essential for student achievement. Every one of our teachers moving forward is going to have to be taught how to teach sex in the standard that they teach. You're an English teacher, you're a history teacher, you're a math teacher, you're going to have a module to help you incorporate sex into those standards. How about this? Students need opportunities to engage in cooperative and active learning strategies with regards to the sex standards. How about this? Sufficient time must be allocated for students to practice skills relating to sexuality education. How about this? Students need multiple opportunities and a variety of assessment strategies to determine their achievements of the sexuality standards and performance. Right? Now I'm going to show you the most graphic thing I'm going to show, well, the second most graphic thing you're going to see tonight. But I want to show you that this stuff's already in your schools. It's already being implemented by Common Core. The poster that I'm about to show you hangs at the front of the classroom in a Shawnee, Kansas middle school. It was a 6th grader who took the picture. This poster has been there all year. Every day. They don't just roll it out. It sits there right next to Clifford the big red dog. And I'm going to show it to you now. Here's the poster. And the poster says, how do people express their sexual feelings? This is a microcosm of Common Core. Do you notice how they don't care about things like spelling? Ladies, have you been caressed by your husbands lately? They spell it wrong. They don't care about proofreading and correctness. They put talking on there twice. But look at the other things on. So, as far as the poster is concerned, all of these are equally legitimate ways to express sexual feelings. Did you know now that saying I like you is sex? Did you know now that talking twice is sex? Did you know now that hugging, all of it's sex? But then again, so are the more vulgar things on that list. You know, and this is what gets me. For a public school system obsessed with sex, birth control I should say, to the point of fetishization, do you notice how there's not the slightest suggestion that certain things on this list could be dangerous, unhealthy, or invoke pregnancy? You see what the purpose of this is, right? If you object to one of these things, you object to all. And if you accept any one of these things as legitimate, you must accept them all. This is pure sociology, and this hangs on the wall in the front of the classroom. It's been there every single day of class, 8 hours a day the kids stare at it. And when the 6th grader took the picture and brought it home to Dad, Dad predictably freaked out. Even more disturbing than the poster is how the school reacted. This is Hawker Grove Middle School spokeswoman Leanne Neal. The poster that you reference is actually part of our middle school health and science materials. And it is a part of our district-approved curriculum. Where'd they get it? You guessed it, the National Sexuality Standards. The curriculum it is a part of aligns with national standards around those issues. And do you see it hangs at the front of the room during math class? and during social studies class, and during English class, because it's all part of the same thing. This book. Now, this book predates Common Core. This book dates from 1998. Remember what I've told you. Common Core is not new. It's just a dramatic acceleration of what's already been there. But in all the versions of this book I've seen published in the last 2 years, every single version of this book is stamped in big red letters, Common Core approved. This is Planned Parenthood's book. It's also been approved by the National Sexuality Standards, besides Common Core, and it teaches 4th graders how to masturbate. Very quickly, here's the thing you see when you open the book. Naked people. And you notice this is the pictorial version of the poster I just showed you. Notice what you've got here in our social justice world. Fat naked people, skinny naked people, tall naked people, short naked people, black naked people, Hispanic naked people, white naked people. I don't even know how they got this one past the child pornography people. Even tiny little naked baby people. Notice the same objective? Do you see what this does? What the purpose of all of Common Core is? It is to break down any moral or ethical distinction between anything. We have heard for if you've just listened, everybody from Bill Ayers to Saul Alinsky, all the way back to Lenin himself. Vladimir, not John, although sometimes I wonder what the difference was. Going all the way back, the entire premise is the single largest thing that gets in the way of status control is Judeo-Christian morality. Unmaking that is a major problem here. And then you actually get actual pictures in the book of kids pleasuring themselves as a guide for kids to learn how to do it themselves, right? The schools now have taken up your responsibility as parents to teach yourself sex. They've taken it over now. And you wonder what's going to happen when those kids come back at you when you're trying to teach them. So you don't teach your kids sex at 5, but they're doing it now. Well, I shouldn't even call it sex. Every single thing you just saw is pure, unadulterated sociology. And it comes part and parcel, hand in hand with Common Core. We're almost done. And we're about 8:30, so that's why I said I would try to get done. So the last thing I have to say to you is this. Not surprisingly, all of this stuff for kids is wreaking developmental havoc on children. We have a document with over 200 clinical and developmental psychologists who signed it, begging the states to stop this. It is doing significant developmental harm to our kids. I'm going to show you, by way of ending, just one of these testimonies from New York. You're going to see why New York now is trying to get out. This is Dr. Mary Calamia, a clinical social worker, psychologist, and works with all sorts of kids. This is what her experience with... Now remember, they've had the tests 2 years longer than you've had them here. Here's Dr. Mary Calamia's testimony. There are all sorts of testimonies like this from clinical social workers.
Good afternoon. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a psychotherapist. I work with parents, children, and about half of my caseload is teachers also. My caseload represents about 20 different school districts in Suffolk County. In the fall of 2012, my phone started ringing. I started getting an inordinate number of referrals of students, a lot of honors students, 8th graders mostly, who were self-mutilating. They were cutting themselves with sharp objects, and they were burning themselves with cigarettes. My phone never stopped. And I didn't know why. I asked the kids, and all they kept saying was, "We can't take the pressure, it's too much." I also started getting a lot of elementary school students referred to me. They were refusing to go to school. They said they felt stupid and that school was too hard. They were throwing tantrums, begging to stay home, and upset to the point of vomiting. I was hearing from parents about kids bringing home homework they couldn't help them with. I was alarmed to hear that in some cases there were no textbooks for the parents to look at, and they had no idea what their children were learning. The teachers were reporting a staggering level of anxiety and depression, and that was when I first heard the term Common Core, and learned about the standards that we now say set the bar so high anyone can walk right under it. Everyone was talking about the tests. As the school year progressed and the tests loomed, my patients were increasing their self-mutilating behaviors. They were complaining of insomnia, panic attacks, loss of appetite, depressed mood, and in one case, suicidal thoughts that resulted in a 2-week hospital stay for an adolescent. We can't regulate biology. Young children cannot engage in the type of critical thinking that the Common Core calls for. That would require a fully developed prefrontal cortex, a part of the brain that is not fully functional until adulthood. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for critical thinking, rational decision-making, and abstract thought, all things that the Common Core requires prematurely. We give children pre-assessments, tell them to succeed, and then give them tests on material they haven't learned, and tell them it's okay to fail. They cannot resolve that mixed message. Last spring, a 6-year-old encountered a multiplication sign on the NWEA first grade math exam and asked the teacher what it was. The teacher was not allowed to help him and told him to just do his best. From that point on, the student's test performance went downhill. He couldn't shake off the unfamiliar symbol and couldn't believe his teacher wouldn't help him. The Common Core requires children to read informational texts that are owned by a handful of corporations. They don't have a filter to distinguish good information from bad. So whatever you put in front of them, they take that as gospel. They're literal. So when we give them a textbook that explains the Second Amendment as, the people have the right to keep and bear arms in a state militia, they will look no further for clarification. We ask them to write critically using emotionally charged language to persuade instead of inform. They don't have that functional prefrontal cortex, so they tap into their limbic system, which is the part of the brain that involves basic human emotions, anger and fear being the foremost. So when we ask them to use emotionally charged language, we're actually asking them to fuel their language with fear and anger and aggression. They cannot temper this judgment. They don't have the ability to do that. So we teach to the test, which I think doesn't really measure learning. I think the tests measure endurance and resilience. Only a child who can sit still for 90 minutes, come back the next day and do it again, and the next day again, can succeed. I'm going to introduce you to a couple, I'm almost done, I'm going to introduce you just a couple of student stories, okay? A couple of the faces of the Common Core. We have an entire third grade class that spent the entire day sobbing after one testing session. A second grader who witnessed this is now in third grade and won't go to school. She's being evaluated, a 7-year-old being evaluated for psychotropic medication just to get her to go to school. A 6-year-old who came home crying because in September, in the first grade, she didn't know what a vertex was. 2 8-year-olds opted out of the ELA exam and were publicly denied cookies because the teacher gave them to the class but wouldn't give them to them. And that teacher, who under duress, felt obligated to do such a thing. A 6th grader who once aspired to be a writer but now won't do it because we do it all day long, even in math. And a mother who has to leave work early because her son is hysterical over his math homework, and his CPA grandfather who's babysitting for him can't even help him do it. And countless other kids who are refusing to go to school, feel stupid, and now are completely turned off to education. I will conclude with this one thought. Our country became a superpower on the backs of men and women who learned in one-room schoolhouses. This isn't rocket science. It doesn't take a great deal of technology or corporate or government involvement to help our children to succeed. We need to rethink the Common Core and the associated high-stakes testing and get back to the business of educating our children in a safe, healthy, and productive manner. Thank you.
Okay, here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to make a quick closing comment. That's the website you can go to. I think what I'd like to do is let the gentlemen come up and make their last announcements. And then if everybody's willing, I'm more than happy after that to answer any questions that you have. But they have some important information about how you can get involved to fight this. So for right now, copy the email address down. Let's let the gentlemen make their talk or their observations. And then I'll come back and answer any questions that you do have, okay? So give us just a second. Thank you for listening.
Let's give them a big hand.